Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on designing for theater, television, and film presented by Mike Baldassari. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can enter your questions and we'll consolidate those and answer them at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after the presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Session Workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mike Baldassari, the presenter for today's webinar. Mike is a Tony and Emmy-nominated lighting designer whose work includes Broadway productions of Cabaret, In Residence, and First Date, as well as films like Nine and Rock of Ages, Netflix comedy specials, Saturday Night Live's Film Unit, and my next guest needs no introduction with David Letterman. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Laura. It's nice to be here today, and thank you to Martin for having me. I am always flattered and honored to be asked to do one of these. When I meet people on the street or a cocktail party or something like that, and they ask me what I do for a living, my simple reply is always, I'm a lighting designer that works in Broadway shows and TV shows and concerts and movies. So as such, I've been very, very lucky to have a diversified career. But it's also been a conscious choice of mine to work in as many genres as I could. So now let's get started with a quick tour through my resume. A brief history of my career. I start with Broadway because that's sort of my home base. I've worked a lot in theater and Broadway, more than 20 Broadway shows, and that's everything from second assistant to first assistant to associate to co-designer to lighting designer, including a Tony nomination for Cabaret, which I did with Peggy Eisenhower. We co-designed that. Pretty much all of my work is musicals. I put the little star there next to it because actually season before last, I did a play on Broadway, Children of a Lesser God. But that's not really, it's very, very rare that I get asked to do plays. I pretty much only do musicals. I've done countless national and international tours. They have been seen live in more than 25 countries. So if I didn't work there, then at least a tour of mine has been to more than 25 countries at this point, and lots of regional theater designs. So as I mentioned, I had done Cabaret. This was directed by Sam Mendes and Rob Marshall. As I mentioned, my foundation is really in the theater, so my focus is always, always, always on telling the story. Cabaret is one of the great American musicals that was a real privilege to be involved with it for as long as I have been. Along with my partner Peggy Eisenhower, we designed the original in 1998 and brought it back to Broadway again in 2014. We opened this version with Michelle Williams in the lead and was eventually taken over by Emma Stone, who's shown here. This past season on Broadway, I designed In Residence, which was a very unique setup where we rotated in and out such diverse acts as Morrissey, Dave Chappelle, Mel Brooks, and many others. So a real hybrid where we brought some of the concert world to Broadway with an incredible amount of flexibility and quick changeovers. This is something that has been attempted in the past on Broadway, but was really never been able to be pulled off. One example on the flip side of that is a Broadway musical I did called First Date, where I brought a lot of pop concert elements to a traditional book musical. And in the next Broadway season, I did a different Broadway show called Holler If You Hear Me, which was a hip-hop musical using the catalog of Tupac Shakur. We had just predated Hamilton, and again, with lots of concert elements in a Broadway musical. This is from a reimagining of the classic musical 42nd Street that I designed last summer in St. Paul that we hope has a big future in front of it. A few examples of my work on film. I did Rob Marshall's Nine, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth later. Also for the Rock of Ages movie, which was directed by Adam Shankman, Again, this is another one I'll talk about a little bit more in depth in a few moments. Neil Young Trunk Show, which was one of the trilogy of Neil Young concert movies that was directed by the late, great Jonathan Demme. And I lit a major heavy metal concert sequence in the all-female Ghostbusters that was out a couple of years ago with some of the super talented women I had worked with on SNL, directed by Paul Feig. This was meant to mimic an Ozzy Osbourne, or festival that Ozzy Osbourne was the headliner. And I've done scenes and or concerts in movies like Joyful Noise, Sex and the City 2, Going the Distance. As Laura mentioned, I've done lots of Netflix specials, including season 2 of My Next Guest with David Letterman. We were in the middle of shooting season 3 when everything was shut down. Among some of my other Netflix comedy specials are John Mulaney's The Comeback Kid, which we shot at the Chicago Theater, and Pete Davidson, Alive from New York, which we shot this past December. A very unique special that I did was for Ray Romano, which again I'll go into in a little bit more depth in a few moments. And some of the other stand-up specials I've done, Chris D'Elia, Dana Carvey, Joe Rogan, a short season for Netflix of something called Bumping Mics with Jeff Ross and Dave Attell, and the Bridget Everett one that I did, we shot at Joe's Pub in New York City. I've designed a lot of pre-tapes for the SNL film unit, including dozens of sketches, including lots of digital shorts, parodies, things like Meryl Streep on Ice, Drake's Hotline Bling, American Ninja Warrior, a parody of Michael Bublé's duets, and another one called You're a Rat Bastard, Charlie Brown. I'll talk a little bit more about that one as well in a sec. I've also done a fair amount of pre-tapes with Seth Meyers. I enjoy creating these with the Seth Meyers team as they're not specifically meant to look overly theatrical. So even from the equipment side, it's much more about a combination of film and TV lighting gear, but I always try and bring a theatrical look to it. So it rarely feels like straight ahead TV lighting. Some of these include Day Drinking with Rihanna, which now has almost 14 million views, and the one with Jon Snow has almost 18 million views. In the concert world, I've done multiple tours with Neil Young, going back to his 1992's Harvest Moon tour. And over several years, I've done multiple production designs with the hard rock band Alice in Chains. Some of the other televised concerts that I've designed include concerts for Mary J. Blige, Tim McGraw. This is Live to the Home Front, which we broadcast to all of the military bases and the Navy ships all around the world. That was very special. And the other one is Sam Smith, Live from the Apollo. With the band Fish, I've done a number of New Year's Eve concerts from Madison Square Garden. Dave Gallo is the brainchild behind these. He's the one who comes up with the ideas and he directs them. Every one of these gags feature an over-the-top sense of theatricality, extraordinarily theatrical stunts, often with acrobats and armies of dancers. For this one, we made it rain. We designed a ballet with umbrellas that could go up and down, and were also lit internally, and we literally made it rain cats and dogs at midnight. For this one, another year we created a giant pirate ship above the band in a sea that was created with 20,000 programmable wristbands on the audience. Again, Chris Kuroda is Fish's LD. He's their lighting designer, and his programmer is Andrew Giffen. These guys have both become really great collaborators on these gags over the years. And finally, for the last year, we created a kinetic aerial sculpture featuring 10 aerialists, along with 10 what we called fish droids. All 20 of these were independently controlled. The humans, which you can see down here, they were tracked by automated lights utilizing a customized motion control system that the Fish team developed. Really cool stuff. Those are the droids up here at the back with smoke shooting out. So this brings us to, there's three ways that I think about how I approach these. And it's because there's really three ways that I think about the lighting. The first one being the theatrical. Theatrical, I think of it as the lighting has to be organic because you're lighting for the eye. That's all that matters is the people who are sitting in the audience. The eye is one of the greatest cameras there are. So it's organic and it has to work well for an audience sitting there. And by work well, I mean in terms of intensity, hue, saturation, all of those kinds of things. It has to feel right for the human eye. The next way I think about it is television is electronic. For television, it's only you're lighting what's on the monitor. It doesn't really matter what it looks like to your eye, or it doesn't matter what it looks like in the room. It only matters what it looks like on the monitor. In film, it's chemical. And I say chemical because it's a nod to the way films used to be shot. But once it was captured in the camera, a lot of other people touched the film after I've touched it. And depending on the chemical baths and all of that kind of stuff that they used to develop the prints, that always influences the color. Today, most motion pictures are captured electronically, but there's still a lot of post-production done. So it's other people's hands that it goes into once it's left the camera. How does this all come together? So as you can see, I've been lucky enough to have a really diverse career to this point, and you might ask, how do all these different genres of lighting designs inform and affect each other? It's always been a goal of mine to work in a lot of different areas, and the bonus to that comes with this diversity is that it's helped to build a very deep toolbox, or in other words, what I like to call cross-pollination. Cross-pollination, so we could look at it, well, cross-pollination I always think comes out of the theater, right? Theater is the oldest of all of these mediums. And we could look at it as if it's a one-way distribution from the theater, like we're just trying to apply theatrical lighting ideas to films, concerts, and television. But I always really try to take it a step further than that. So to me, true cross-pollination is in that it creates an endless loop of design choices, always in service to the story. By using theatrical ideas and techniques and borrowing from other genres to provide more wide-ranging possibilities, we support and serve the design. Again, since we always want to be telling a story, it's important to have as many tools in the toolbox to help us guide the viewer, either on stage, in film, on TV, or during our concert. So now we'll take a look at a few examples. We'll start with Broadway crosses film. As I mentioned, Rob Marshall brought me in to do the movie musical 9 since I had worked with him on Cabaret. Rob specifically wanted theatrical lighting for all of the musical numbers to reflect that they were happening in Guido Contini's mind. He's the lead character in it, as opposed to the real-life scenes. Dion Beebe was the Academy Award-winning cinematographer that I worked with very closely. This particular picture is taken on the full-size rehearsal set. So again, just like you would on a Broadway show or any kind of theatrical event, you would go watch rehearsal in a rehearsal studio of some kind. This one happens to just be built out. So here's a picture of the set under theatrical lighting. All of the numbers I lit for the film all took place on this single set, which was about the size of a football field. We were at Studio H at Shepperton Studios in London, which is the largest soundstage in the UK after the 007 soundstages. This is part of the opening number. Again, Dion Beebe is a master at capturing theatrical light, but it's one of the things that's so important about being a theatrical designer working on film and television is that if the DP can't capture it, it doesn't matter how good the lighting is. So it always has to be able to be adapted very quickly. The adaptation has to happen by making adjustments in color and intensity very quickly to respond to what the DP needs. And very often in these, there might be 60 to 100 lighting cues that all have to be adjusted very quickly. And so it's very important to come up with a way to be able to make a lot of adjustments almost on the fly when the cameras are rolling and you have the actors on the set. So this is from the finale of the opening number, which ends with all of the women in Guido Contini's life coming together in his mind. Guido is here in the chair, played by Daniel Day-Lewis. This is another number on the same exact set. We just added a white cyc, and this was for the number called Cinema Italiano. And this is a bit of a close-up of the set. Lots of ability for light and shadow on this one. And this is from Dame Judi Dench's number called Folie Bergère. Still the same set, just draped with scenic electric. So the lighting transports us from Rome to Paris in Guido's head. And for Fergie's number, Be Italian, we added over 20 tons of sand to the soundstage. And here's just a little clip. You can see women with their tambourines in this dance number swirl the sand all around their heads. It's really quite amazing. So, as I say in the film biz, moving on. This next example will be Broadway Crosses Television. As I mentioned, I work on Saturday Night Live and some of their parodies. So this is a parody of the Broadway show, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which of course is based on the Peanuts comic book strip, but it's as if David Mamet had written it. So think Peanuts meets Glengarry Glen Ross. SNL is a very unique situation in that from the initial phone call to actually shooting is typically 24 to 36 hours when they choose to do these types of parodies. So I believe I received a phone call from this like early Thursday morning that we were going to do this, and then we were shooting it by Friday afternoon and it was wrapped by Friday night. So just looking at the picture here, lots of primary colors to mimic the comic book strip. These are all screen grabs, but you can see variations on the comic strip color while still being able to see the faces. Of course, this is Bill Hader as Al Pacino as Charlie Brown. One of the things that was critical here was keeping the look very simple. As I've said, primary colors, bright and flat, just like a cartoon strip, which would have been my approach as if I was lighting this. If I was lighting this for Broadway, this would have been my exact approach. Here, I've just adapted the ideas so it can be captured on camera. Again, very simple, single sources when possible, big solid color washes. In this case, the blue backlight that's on the floor is all Martin Mac auras, which blend together very nicely. Like I said, very simple ideas. In this case, we're using some of the scenery in silhouette just for a variation on the look, but still with saturated cartoon strip colors. This simple scene is lampooning the reoccurring situation in the Peanuts comics where Lucy pulls the football out from Charlie Brown at the last month. If you notice, it's all green backlight to suggest the grass, but there's just enough front light that their faces aren't green. Martin Short playing Larry David playing Linus. Pretty, pretty, pretty good. This is the one and only light plot that I'm showing today. The reason for it being how simple it was. Again, from initial phone call to shooting is about 36 hours, and that includes getting the gear ordered and delivered, drawing the plot, loading it into the theater, writing all the cues. So it had to be super simple just to get it all done in that amount of time. If you notice, there's only four overhead electrics. One has 5 units, one has 3 units. The biggest one has 11 units. There's some 6 lamp bars on the sides to fill in the voids in the wings, and some Martin Mac auras out front. Those were used to light the first few rows of the audience where there were some kids staged that were part of the bit. So very important to understand what it was we were going for and to get it right the first time, as there's no time in that kind of a schedule for big changes. So this is very much lit like a stage musical, but again, in such a way that it could be filmed for TV and very quickly at that. So we'll move on now to Theatrical Crosses Concert. So bringing some theatricality to a concert. This is a view from upstage for a theater tour that I designed for Alice in Chains. The heart was from the album artwork, and this is a rear projection on a semi-transparent kabuki drop. So during the changeover, kabuki drop came in, and then we projected this heart onto it. Again, this is upstage looking downstage. That's why you're seeing a drum set in the left-hand picture. One of the most important ideas in the theater is the opening of the show. It's critical to grab the audience and get them excited about the theatrical ride that you want to take them on. So now we're going to flip around here from the front. The entire time while the kabuki was down during the changeover, the heart was beating. It was also reinforced with audio in the house. So for the whole changeover, the audience heard thump, 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 and those two things were linked together. So the heart was going bigger and smaller, just a little bit, but right along with the audio track. Then, as the house lights went out, which is where this screen grab is from, the heart starts beating faster. So we're already had a few builds for the audience right here at the opening of the show. The heart is beating, the house lights go out, we're building the excitement. Then, with the opening riffs of the first song, the guitar player appears in silhouette next to the heart. The heart speeds up, we see the guitar player. You can already see the fists in the air as we're going into our next build, which was now the heart fading out, and in a similar fashion, we add the bass player. And that leads us to a very simple chase sequence where one at a time, each of the members of the band appears in silhouette. I let this ride all the way into the beginning of the vocals just because that helped to build the anticipation. It was another build for the audience. They know they're going to get to see the band eventually, but just by giving them little pieces of it one at a time, the anticipation builds and builds and builds even greater until finally we drop the kabuki midway through the first verse and the crowd goes nuts. So it's a super simple thing, but by putting together a real opening for the show in the same way you would have an opening number in a Broadway musical theater piece, you take the audience on a ride just by building up the layers of excitement. Now we'll go back in the other direction and we'll go to a concert number in a Broadway musical. So a few years ago, I designed a Broadway musical called First Date. And just as you can guess from the title, it's about a couple's first date. In this case, the couple was played by Zach Levi and Krista Rodriguez. They meet in a restaurant. Again, Dave Gallo, who's a frequent collaborator, designed this set. This is a screenshot. Part of the structure of the show is that it all takes place in the restaurant where they meet. Zach and Krista are the leads, and all of the other characters that pop up in their heads, either someone's grandmother, a gay best friend, a rabbi, etc., are all played by the other 4 actors on the stage. You can see 2 of them over here, stage right, and there's another 2 on the couch back there, stage left. These 6 people never leave the stage during the entire show. Part of the comedy of the show is that at the drop of a hat, we get transported to other spaces in the character's head without anyone leaving the set or the set physically changing. So in a blink of an eye, we had to go from this reality setup into a fantasy rock number that happened with her 2 bad boys. Again, these are screenshots, so these aren't pictures that were taken by like a real photographer. In the blink of an eye, as the music kicks in, a very well-controlled palette keeps the song in one place. Again, just as I would do in a rock show, I would limit each song to a very controlled palette. In this case, I was inspired by the headband one of the British rockers were wearing, which was a Union Jack. So this number went to all red, white, and blue. Beams of light suddenly appear along with color chases that are all timed perfectly to the music. Very important that it's timed perfectly, same as you would want it to be in a concert situation. So it's not just random lights flashing, it has to have a purpose. Again, we're always telling a story. To that end, the best compliment I received was from my buddy Dave Gallo, the set designer, who said, you know, it's really refreshing to see a rock number in a Broadway show that looks like a rock number, as opposed to the Broadway version of a rock number. Here's a slightly better quality non-screen grab of the 2 guys up on the bar. And of course, the button of the number where she's been singing about how hot the guys are. And then, once, just like at the top of it, in the blink of an eye, we go right back into the restaurant, right back into reality. All right, moving on. Here's concert crosses film. So this is a good segue into putting theatricalized concert sequences onto film. As I mentioned, I designed all of the concert sequences for the movie musical Rock of Ages. It was primarily in a club, an arena, and a stadium, which happened throughout the film. It takes place in June of 1987. One of my main jumping off points for my approach to this movie was that instead of reproducing the exact lighting from a show in 1987, it was way more important to reproduce the way you remembered it, because the way you remember it is always way cooler than it actually was. So just like in the theater, the lighting has to always be telling a story. This is the interior of the Bourbon Room, where a lot of the film takes place. It's supposed to be the premier Sunset Strip rock club of the day. Sort of think, you know, Whiskey A Go-Go. A few things to point out in this picture. One of the ubiquitous lighting instruments of the late 80s was the 6-lamp bar. 6 par cans with octagonal gel frames. There's 2 here at the sides of the stage. I made sure that they were real ones and that whenever any of these lights were close to the actors, they were the actual real ones. I also gave a number of 6-lamp bars to the art department that they could use for set dressing, for backstage shots, et cetera, et cetera. For the lights that were a little further away from the actors, like these back here, those were pars, but they had scrollers on them. But in order to make them look like the 6-lamp bars, I essentially put a costume on each of the scrollers. So from the ground, you would never say, oh, that's, you know, there's some kind of technology back there. It looks the same as it does to this. So, and then some of these other lights that like are here and here, these are actually Martin Max 600 washes that again, we attach gel frames to. So we were intentionally disguising the newer technology that wasn't necessarily there in 1987. This is a different setup in the same club. So again, the only place where the gel would have been changed was in the 6-lamp bars that are on both sides of the stage, because that's closest to the actors. But all the other 6-lamp bars or other pars up in the air are just scrollers with the gel frame costume. So not much different between right here and right here. Here's a close-up of Tom Cruise. Note the Martin Mac 250 Plus in the back. This was one of my favorite lights that Martin has ever made due to its size. It was very easy to have these little guys that you could plant around a band, and they always look great on camera. I have to say it's worth going to YouTube to see Tom perform Pour Some Sugar on Me, which is what he's doing in this clip here. Again, my jumping off point in telling the story was he's the biggest performer in the world with the biggest lighting system in the world with the best LD in the world. And to support that, I added as much stuff as we could fit, right along with the art department. It's the proverbial trying to fit 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. There's way more marshals than you would need, and we added a few hundred silver MR16 Birdie par cans to the rig that outline the amps as well as hanging up in the air. Again, helping to tell the story of it's the biggest band in the world playing in this small club. And because he's got the greatest LD in the world, he would have brought in all this extra stuff and he would have cued it in impeccably. So again, it's definitely worth go to YouTube and look up Tom Cruise performing Pour Some Sugar on Me. Here's a picture from the arena rig. Again, tons and tons of silver par cans with the octagonal gel frames. The back wall in this case is 144 scrollers, again with the silver gel frames. A bunch of the other scenes I lit also take place in the arena, so we had to be able to change up the rig pretty easily. And just to demonstrate, so here's exactly what I'm talking about. It's a close-up. So here's a scroller, and then we just attach the silver gel frame to it. Very, very simple. But to the audience, you can't tell the difference, what's got a scroller and what doesn't. The scroller is never changed on camera, but again, we needed the ability to change color either between songs or between shots as necessary without getting to the lights. Anything that was close to the actors, like the vertical 6 lamp bars I pointed out earlier, were just manually changed so that you never would have suspected that we were using more advanced technology than was readily available in 1987. The vertical towers and other arrangements were there to fill in the cross shots for the camera. So not necessarily what you would have done in the reality of touring a show like this, but I had to add them to be believable camera backgrounds. So when the camera is shooting across stage and into the wing, there's not just black behind the actors. I'll show a good example of that in a moment. And who doesn't love a shot of Tom Cruise playing the character of Stacey Jacks surrounded by a ton of pyro? So again, his character's name is Stacey Jacks. In another song we did, he plays a guitar solo. And being inspired by, I remembered that there was a Motley Crue video that I found out to be called Wild Side, that at the end of it, you just see the word crew spelled out in lights. And that always stuck with me. So I had remembered it when I was designing this, and so I knew I wanted the ability to spell some words. I went back and found the video, and this is exactly what it was. It's the end of Motley Crue's Wild Side video, which was one of the biggest music videos around at that time, and just spelled out the word crew. So this is my version of it for Stacey Jacks. Again, it was a reference to that video. So this is from the finale of the film for the song Don't Stop Believing. A few points to make on this. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this setup with sort of giant pieces of truss, vertical, is not necessarily what you really would have done at that time. But these side towers worked out as important camera backgrounds. So I hope you can kind of understand. Just imagine if there was a camera down here and it's looking at Tom Cruise, what's in the background? It can't just be black. There always has to be some kind of information. Again, you got to remember, we're always telling a story. This is from the finale sequence when we're supposed to be in Dodger Stadium. I use this as an example of using a theatrical device to tie all of these locations together, as I knew they wanted to end the movie with sky trackers over the Sunset Strip. That was something that we had discussed in pre-production. So, as I mentioned, the finale is Don't Stop Believing. The song starts out in the club. So right away, I introduced this split beam gobo. So the white light behind them is that split beam. So we're going to carry that idea all the way through, but it started right at the very top in this club. So here you can see it as in a wider screen grab. You can see it left and right. And then this scene transitions to a computer-generated Dodger Stadium. And there's the scanning beams going over the crowd, but they're introduced here. Just a quick note. So we filmed we filmed this sequence in the arena. So the only part that's real is this. Everything else here is CG, computer generated. So as we zoom in, we see the stage, and you can see that I continued the split beam gobo into the Martin Mac performances that are in this number. I believe they were Martin Mac 1Ks. A close-up of this idea. One other point to make here is about telling the story. I had to pick the colors for this number about 30 days before we actually shot it. The reason for that is that all of the rest of the cast is inserted into this number. And some of them were shot doing their parts before we shot this sequence. Some of them were shot after we did this sequence. So I really had to make a decision ahead of time. I specifically made this a blue and gold number with lots of chasing between the two colors. Again, the reason for that being that all the rest of the cast is inserted into this number. It's about covering all of the scenes that an actor is in. So For those of you who may not know, when you're shooting a movie, you don't get every actor every day. You only get them for the number of days that they're scheduled to be on your set. That's the reason why movies are often shot in a seemingly random order. It's really all about covering all of the scenes an actor is in while you have them. For example, Alec Baldwin and Mary J. Blige are both in this movie, but I'm sure they never met because they never have any acting scenes together. However, they're both in this montage. So this is two shots of Alec Baldwin and Russell Brand. We shot them out in the parking lot in some bleachers about a month before we were shooting the arena setup with Tom Cruise on stage. They're in the same blue and gold color chase, timed to the music. And I put two pictures here just so you can see that we were chasing between the blue and the gold. We set them up where they would be looking. So on screen, we set them up and gave them an eye line so that it would look on screen as if they're looking at Tom Cruise on stage. But in fact, they were just looking at a black flag with an X on it in the middle of a parking lot in the middle of the night. In this slide below them, you see Mary J. Blige, who, again, we shot in a totally different location, but with the same blue and gold colors in it. In this case, she's in a gold step. I think we shot her sequence a few weeks after we had shot the concert, but same thing about the eye line, except that she's supposed to be on the other side of the stadium. This is Malin Ackerman, along with Tom's monkey, Hey Man. Again, we shot this totally out of order and in another location. But again, it's the same blue and gold. And we even put a 6-lamp bar with the octagonal gel frames in the foreground to make it believable that she's standing just off stage next to one of the towers that you see in the wide shots. So same thing here. She's supposed to be watching Tom Cruise on stage. As the song crescendos, we add in some more split beams, this time from behind the Marshall stacks. As the camera pulls out, we go back to reveal Dodger Stadium, again with the split beams swirling. The helicopter shot then spins to reveal the sky trackers coming up over the Sunset Strip, over the Hollywood sign. And the camera pans away to finish the movie. So here's the same beams that we started with in the club, taking us all the way to the end of the movie. Again, we want to always be using light to tell the story. So now we're going to go to Concert Cross's theatrical touring. This takes us to a very unique spot. For the purposes of our discussion, I'll call this, as I said, Concert Cross's theatrical touring, because last year I designed the 10th anniversary tour of Rock of Ages, having nothing to do with the fact that I had designed all of the concerts for the film version. I was the only crossover between the two, so more or less purely coincidental. Same story with very different set of circumstances in that they had to play both one-nighters as well as week-long sit-downs in major cities like Boston. One of the major differences, of course, being that this all happened on one set. In this case, for this our Stacey Jacks, the musical numbers still had to have the real rock feel, while the book scenes had to look and feel realistic. Once again, all on a unit set, with a set that could play one-nighters and also had to be able to fit into 3 trucks. So lots of technical challenges here to be able to get this to move around. It had to look big enough to play big venues like the Wang Center in Boston, but also had to be able to do one-nighters. Here's a picture from the load-in. So even just from this, you can get the vibe that it can have big rock looks while still loading in and out quickly. One thing I did steal from doing the movie was the 6-lamp bars. But this time they had LED pars built into them. So the front was a par 64, once again with an octagonal gel frame, the ubiquitous lighting instrument of 1987. But the source was an LED par that fit very nicely into the back end. There was 3 on each side. You can kind of see 2 over here and 2 over here on this side. And one other note, speaking of LEDs, this entire tour was on the road without any dimmers. The spot fixtures that we used were Martin Mac Encore Colds, and the washes were Mac Quantum washes. Now we're going to go to a concert crossing television. for the premiere of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, I was asked to light U2 up on the roof of 30 Rock. Sounds great, except 30 Rock is in New York City, and the roof of Rockefeller Center is 70 floors up, and it was February. At one point, I looked down to the street, and I could see that the temperature at street level was 10 degrees, which is minus 12.2 Celsius. I still get cold anytime I ever hear this song. Dusk at this time of year in New York City, the magic hour lasts all of about 10 minutes. So we had to get the balance just right in order for the sunset to really read on camera. Again, it was a very short window that we had to shoot this in. You can see the Empire State Building and the Freedom Tower both in the back of this shot. And because we couldn't risk losing the entire performance due to weather, we actually threaded the needle between two blizzards in this case. Again, it was February in New York City. As a safety, we actually did a first pass 24 hours earlier. We then reviewed it with the band and Lauren Michaels, who's the executive. And it was the idea that we shoot it an hour earlier to get more of the city and more of the sky. Of course, he was 100% right, but that means when we went to go shoot it the next day, we were making live adjustments to the key lights to get the balance just right. Here's a screen grab from one of the helicopter shots. You can get a sense of how small the rooftop area was. I also added these LED strips into the parapet, just knowing that, you know, when you're from the helicopter shot, you have to focus in very quickly on where we were. So it was important to have some movement. I didn't do a lot of like lights moving all around, but getting some chases going through the LEDs on the parapets was very helpful for that. Same thing with the trusses, again, just to help focus the eye in the big wide shots. Here's a picture from the load-in with the crew. That's Queens that's in the background. Here's a crew member on top focusing one of the key lights that we were using to light the marching band, the Rutgers marching band, or the marching drum line we had, the Rutgers marching band drum line. Note, here's the top of the Chrysler building in the background. So while we're here, I have to say, I use the word I a lot today, but none of this would exist without the hard work and talents of all the crews that I'm fortunate enough to work with, as well as some very talented moving light programmers, and with the support of some very talented associates, assistants, and draftspeople. So I didn't want the opportunity to pass without saying thank you to all those folks. We're going to move on here to a live concert crosses television. RED is a charity that was founded by Bono and U2, and after I had worked with them on The Tonight Show, Willie Williams, who's their production designer and creative director, asked me to be a part of this, which fortunately was at a much lower altitude than Top of the Rock. We built our set in Times Square. This is looking south with a load-in in the morning, shot the show around dinner time, and the entire production was gone by midnight. So this is looking downtown. This is the building where the ball traditionally drops from. Our set was made to look like four C-tainers stacked together. And one of the big gags that we were doing here was at a certain moment, we were turning most of the screens in Times Square red. I was able to bring in my favorite video engineer, Billy Steinberg, who I had worked with very closely to make this happen so that we could read it properly on TV. When he and I did a lot of pre-production, and I said to him, what's going to happen when the whole world goes red? He said he was actually going to have to take some red out of the camera at that moment just so that it would read properly. So I had to look at a follow spot solution where I could actually get some degree of red to the spots to counterbalance what the video engineer was taking out. Again, it was a lot of pre-production discussions about how to do that. And to point out the follow spots, there's two here in a snorkel lift. There's two here in a snorkel lift. There's a snorkel lift here that has 2 down low here and 2 down low on this side. If you notice, since it was 4 setainers, essentially looking like the top 2 had their sides ripped off, we have this very, very low beam right here. So it was very important that these front follow spots had to be low enough to get underneath that beam. Here's a little bit closer shot. This is Bruce Springsteen with U2. The reason for it was this was right after Bono had his bicycle accident in Central Park. So Bono being Bono, he picked up his phone and got Bruce Springsteen to take over for him. Again, you can see a little bit better here that the set was meant to look like 4 shipping containers. 4 setainers, sorry. And here's that beam that I was telling you about. A little bit closer. And of course, it rained. So the show had to be performed with the plastic roof and plastic sides. But, you know, the rain just added to the theatricality of it all anyway. And since it was essentially a box, it was very important that the follow spots were low enough to get under that front beam and also be out of where there was a lot of cameras going back and forth. There was no camera shadows in the follow spots. So here's Springsteen, U2, Carrie Underwood, Kanye West, Chris Martin from Coldplay. And yeah. Now turning around, looking from upstage, what was very important here was getting the balance right. So we had to find the right balance where you could still see the audience, which you can clearly see here. You can see the performers, they're not blown out, and the video screens are also not blown out. So you can read right there CNN and a few other things. So again, this was a very, very tricky balance where I had to work very closely. I always work closely with the video engineer. Now we're going to go in a completely different direction. This is Small Comedy Club Crosses Television. So this is a very unique Netflix special that we did a year or 2 ago with Ray Romano. Normally these things, the show takes place in one single location. What we did differently was that this show took place in 2 venues, and we also included Ray walking out on the streets of Greenwich Village. So we began tracking Ray from his home in the village, and he had to be lit just enough that he could be seen clearly while looking like he was lit by the various sources he was walking by. It could never look like there was a spot on him. It always had to fit in and feel very natural. These are some screen grabs. Again, you can see there's just enough fill in his face without looking artificial. And the way we achieved this in the very, very crowded Greenwich Village was with what I called the best boy mount. So we got a flag holder for my best boy, mounted a light to a C-stand in the holster, and put the battery and controller in his backpack. So you can see here how crowded the streets can get. This is out in front of the club. And there was no option whatsoever to control the street. And basically the way that we made this work was the best boy was in front, walking straight ahead, the light pointed behind him. He was followed by the cameraman. It was a steady cam with his camera facing backward and followed by Ray. So the 3 of them, that's how we got all those shots. So we started out in the actual Comedy Cellar, which is a very, very small venue. It only holds about 40 people. And there was no real power available. So I only added 2 very small Fresnels to just try to punch him out of it from the wall. Other than that, I was able to add some frost to some of the house fixtures and do a little bit of color correction. But that was about it. So Ray did half of his show from here. He then walked out onto the street, around the corner, and went to the Comedy Cellar at the Village Underground. Now, the Village Underground is a bigger club, but we only had about 20 amps of power available to us, with no possibility of bringing in a generator. This was solved with using lots and lots of LED fixtures. Here's a quick screen grab of Ray entering, where you can see the LED fixtures we mounted to the ceiling. They were mounted with zip ties to whatever we could find on the ceiling to light the audience. it's such a dark club that without adding these fixtures, there would be no way to even know there was an audience present. Once again, I added frost and color correct to the house fixtures to make this look good. But to get backlight, I added some very small LED fixtures you can see right up in here that, again, we just zip tied to the lights that were already lighting the brick back wall. And for the other walls, I added some uplights, which you can see here, that were battery-operated wireless LED lights, just to help us get some definition for the room. Picture. So again, here's some of the uplights. As I mentioned, we were only allotted 20 amps total, and we needed a hazer. There was lots and lots of discussions about the hazer, but when we were with Ray during pre-production, there was always two questions. Are we or are we not going to use haze? And how many plain pizzas were we going to get, and how many with pepperoni? Truthfully, we talked a lot more about pizza than hazers. A quick diversion to live corporate broadcast. So let's make a right-hand turn. This is the CBS Upfront at Carnegie Hall. For those who you ask what's an upfront, it's a corporate show where the broadcast networks roll out their new shows to the Madison Avenue advertisers. The key here is that it's also broadcast to the buyers in LA, Chicago, Atlanta, and Detroit. So it's got to look good both in the room and for broadcast. So it a little bit breaks my earlier rule about, you know, for television, it's electronic, you only light it for the camera. This has to work for both. Making it look good for both a live event and a broadcast is a very, very fine needle to thread. And to that challenge, this is also front projection and has IMAG. So if you look here, the skin tone in the IMAG window looks really close to the actual skin tone of Stephen Colbert. Again, this is a very, very fine needle to thread. And it has to look good to both the people in the room and the people who are seeing it on broadcast. You can take my word for it that it's a challenge and a delicate balance that I have to do with the video engineer, as the screens by nature want to go towards blue. So look here at the live color down below, how closely it matches the projected color up above. Look at the yellow dress, the pink dress, the white dress. The only suit that looks a little off is this brown to that brown. I can't tell you why, but these other ones, this is, again, really, really difficult to make this happen. So we'll go back on track here. And we want to, as I mentioned earlier, I designed season 2 of My Next Guest Needs No Introduction with David Letterman, and we were in the midst of shooting scene 3 when the pandemic hit. This is very simple. It's Dave sitting on a stage interviewing people. I came up with the idea to say, let's make it look like we dropped 2 chairs into the middle of the loading. So here's some stuff around the stage that looks like somewhat random, but it's on purpose and acts as our scene. Half of these episodes were shot in LA and half are shot in New York City. Here's a wide view of the theater. Again, looks like we've walked into a load-in. Some of the electrics are down low, everything's exposed. But what we're also doing here is we're selectively hiding cameras. So if you notice, this wall is lit up here, and there's a dark spot down here. In this dark spot is where that's where Dave's main camera is. And same thing on the other side, that's where the guest's main camera is. And there's another camera up center that we hide up there. So we're using light and dark on purpose to hide some stuff. Some dance booms in the background, just for some glowing. And the walls and the fly rail are lit, also touched with white, just so there's a nice background and something that punch the subjects out against. The 2 colors on the boom, they're down very low on dimmer here, but it's a blue and a gold. Those are just a sort of nod to the blue and gold logo that were the color of Dave's previous network shows, Late Night with David Letterman and The Late Show. The large 10Ks and 5Ks are also a nod to his 30-plus year career as a late night TV host. If you look very, very closely in this still, you can see the upstage camera position. It's right in here somewhere. But one of the ways that it's hidden is by putting bright objects next to it, that's 10K and the 5K, and obscuring the vertical lines of the camera surround with barn doors and some of that kind of stuff, along with creating other silhouettes against the back wall. As you can see, the back wall feels theatrical and well designed. There's a really nice rhythm to the light and shadow of it, just like you'd find in a really great painting. With the house lights on, this is taken from that camera position. So we're looking out towards the house. There's lights in the balcony up here, just to help define the space. Down below, there's these goalposts here with MAC auras on them that backlight the audience. And there's also a pipe above the chairs with MAC auras on them that frontlight the audience. And again, between the booms, 5Ks, 10Ks, there's always something decent in the background without overwhelming the picture. I've been going on for so long now, I think Dave's beard may have grown another inch or two while we've been on this webinar. So with that, I want to say thank you to Martin by Harmon for having me. You can find me on Instagram or my website, mikeomatic.com. So let's open it up to Laura for some questions.
Okay, great, thank you. The first question is asking, do you have a description of how you connect beam angle to story?
How I connect beam angles to story?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, the one thing I would say is for theater, you can always work at a kind of a 45-degree angle for front light. When you get into television, it by necessity has to be lower. So that's one of those sort of, those two worlds have to collide, but you have to find a way to make it work for both. So again, I'd say, you're pretty safe in the theater, usually at, 45 degrees or so. But once you're in television world, and film for that matter too, it has to really come down a lot lower.
All right, the next question is asking, what is your favorite combination of two colors on the stage at the same time?
Ooh, my favorite two colors. I mean, first off, I love, Congo blue. I feel like, that's one of those colors that excites the rods and cones in your eyes. So it's always really great to have Congo blue. And then there's so many other colors that work with that. Gold goes great with Congo blue, red or magenta. I think that, a Broadway show, it never fails. A really good Broadway show, there's always going to be that part of a dance number that's Congo backlight and magenta sidelight.
All right, next question is asking, if you were told you could only work in one genre for the rest of your career, would you choose theater, television, film, or concert?
That's a great question. I tell you what, I think I would pick film. If I only had to do one, I would pick film, and here's why. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a book that I read a while back that was written by Richard, I forgot his last name, but he was the head of the National Theatre in the UK. And the foreword of his book was a story about Michelangelo and the Medicis. And in the 16th century or something like that, there was a freak snowstorm in Milan. And the Medicis sent for Michelangelo to come give them a sculpture. He basically built them a snowman. So, and then what happens to that snowman? After it melts, it's gone. That's it. That snowman existed that one time, and once it melted, it was gone. And he was using, Richard was using that as a metaphor for theater. Theater just melts away. It exists that one night with that one audience, that one time. It'll never be the same twice. The difference with film, that's chiseled into stone. So, film, the lighting has to be right on the day when the cameras are rolling. There's no going back. It has to be right on the day. On a Broadway show, you can work on a scene for a month, maybe. There's maybe a month of previews. But on a movie, when they say action and the cameras are rolling, it has to be right. That's your one and only shot. But it's going to exist forever. So it's essentially carved in stone.
Okay, this question is asking, what's the color temperature that you go for to balance the need for live audience in the room and broadcast, based on the example you gave for one of the case studies with huge projection matching closely to their dress or suit?
Okay, that's a great question. And I can say that it's a balance every year. You know, if it was just to the projection people, they would say, can't we just do this in daylight? Because they know that everything's going to look good. If I was just in the theater, I'd want it to be closer to 3,200. So it's a very delicate dance that I do with the video engineer. I'm going to say we usually end up somewhere around 5,000 at the max. So that seems to be, and there's some magic. You know, I'm a collaborator. I collaborate with the video engineer. I don't know what magic he's doing, but when we get around 5,000 tends to be that magic number. So he can pull things in the direction he needs to. I can pull things in the direction I need to. So 5,000, all of those things that I was showing from the CBS upfront, it's right about 5,000.
Okay, the next question is asking, in your opinion, for theatrical, is it still better to use pars and ellipsoidals than moving lights?
Is it still better to use pars and ellipsoidals than moving lights? Is that what the question was?
Yes.
Okay, here's the sort of conundrum I find. I get asked sometimes to do out-of-town tryouts for a new Broadway musical, and something like the 42nd Street that I showed at the very top, that's something that we hope has another life. The problem comes in, you know, they'll design these sets as if they want to go to Broadway, right? So I'll say, you know, it's a 2020 designed scene, 2020 designed set that hopes it can go to Broadway. The problem then comes in that usually the scenery takes up so much room, there's very little places for other lights. So what I always say is moving lights do three things. Moving lights light people, they light scenery, and they replace a lot of other lights. So I think as scenery gets more complicated, by necessity, we have to use more and more moving lights. I can also say for even fairly small tours, like that Rock of Ages that I was showing, the crew, because that has to be able to do one-nighters, the crew doesn't have time to go up and focus all of those lights. So by using automated lights that can all be done from the ground, it makes it go a lot faster. So in general, I think we're moving more and more towards moving lights. I don't think we're ever turning back.
Okay, the next question is asking, when you're lighting theatrically for film, what is a major gotcha that designers need to be aware of?
Here's the major gotcha. Let's say they're shooting a concert. They're shooting it from the front, right? You make everything look beautiful. You have 100 light cues in that 1 minute. It's a heavy metal sequence. There's 100 light cues in 1 minute. Now they say, okay, we're turning around. So in the time that they pick up the cameras from shooting from the front and go to the back, now everything that was backlight is now front light. Everything that was front light is now backlight. So the major gotcha is you have to have a way to adjust your 100 light cues in the amount of time it takes them to move the cameras. So without getting too technical and too complicated, I do that with a lot of selective inhibitive submastering. And I kind of work with the programmer in advance that we have the ability to add to pile on, and to inhibit things if we need to for that exact situation. So that's a major gotcha right there that you have to be prepared for.
Here's the next question. Do you still work from a focus grid, or have you shifted to presets of entire looks in one reference?
I still like a focus grid. The thing about a focus grid, even for a long-running show, is there's no question as to where the point is supposed to be. It's never arbitrary. You can always bring out the focus dummy, and you can line it up. A lot of times on tours, if we're carrying a floor, we'll permanently mark the floor, either with like little nails into the wood floor, or somehow it's marked on the Marley. And so there's no question. And then what will happen is, with the focus grid, maybe we'll add another 30 special focuses or something like that. Broadway is a little bit different because it's going to be there as a sit down. So you want to have the freedom to kind of, put a light anywhere that you want, but I still like a focus group.
Okay, next question. Do you sometimes make use of time codes in all the genres that you work? When is it most beneficial for your needs?
It is absolutely most beneficial in film, and here's why. So as I just said, let's say, there's a heavy metal sequence in a movie. So maybe there's 100 light cues in 1 minute. I don't want to have to call those cues because I don't want them to ever say, cut, we have to go back because lighting messed up. So that's one way to make sure it's exact every time. The second advantage to that is I then don't have my head in a book. My head is on the screen. I'm standing there right next to the DP. I usually stand between the DP and the director when I'm doing scenes on a movie. So I'm standing there with them. I'm taking their input. I'm making adjustments as needed, but I'm with them. I'm not in my script trying to call the cues properly. And then the third reason for that, when I did 9, I did explain to Rob, I said, look, we're going to do this with time code, and it may take a little bit longer to get it absolutely right the first time, but you're going to thank me, 4 months from now when you're in an editing suite. Because if you, you're going to thank me. Are we okay? It just wigged out here for a second.
What's that?
Oh, okay. You can still hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, sorry. I said to Rob, you'll thank me in 4 months from now when you're in an editing suite, and if you would have taken 2 different shots from 2 different takes and you cut right in the middle of a lighting fade, it's going to be in exactly the same spot. So I think in film, time code is absolutely critical. In the theater, it's really not used as much, but it's starting to be used. Every once in a while, there's something that's just not callable for some reason. And there can be triggers now going back and forth using MIDI and stuff like that that we're starting to use in the theater. In television, I can't think of a lot of occasions where I've used it. But not to say I wouldn't.
Okay, the next question is asking, do you program any lighting consoles, or do you usually work with someone else who takes care of your lighting console?
I always work with somebody else. I am not, that it is beyond me. I'm in awe of those guys. I appreciate what they bring to the table. And also there's another part about, being an artist is not getting, I don't want to get sort of sucked into all of the technical stuff all of the time. I work with really great programmers. They are bringing a skill set to the table that I don't have. And I'm also, it's just not, my brain's not hooked up that way.
The next question is asking, how do you handle the development of LED sources and at the same time getting the colors we are used to from tungsten and gel?
Well, I think the LED stuff's not going away. So I feel like, we have to adapt to it. And the critical thing is we have to keep asking the manufacturers to keep making the LEDs better and better. We've moved quite far beyond RGB. We know that we need, amber and white and sometimes a secondary red and lime and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like, that's the direction we're moving. Also, as artists, we want to be green. We want to use less power. When I was showing the tour of Rock of Ages, that was 100%, with no dimmers, we're using a lot less power. All of that stuff is very important. And I think, we need to continue to ask the manufacturers to make stuff that's better and better. And I think that in terms of I love gel numbers as reference. There's certain lighting fixtures that, if you use a certain ecosystem, you can go in the console and you can call up a swatch book color. I find that very helpful. To be on a film set and say, I'm not always at a console. On a film set, I'm standing next to the director. I'm not next to the lighting console. So, you know, I can say, give me like an R22 orange, and at least that's a jumping off point. So I like kind of using gel as reference for LED.
All right, the next question is asking if you have any tips or tricks to work with video engineers, as it's always a fine balance for live and broadcast.
Yeah, I think the only tip I would ever say for, you know, working with video engineers, again, like I've gotten to know what I know about video engineers because I've asked them questions, and, you know, I'm somebody that I'm confident enough to say when I don't know something, and I'll go spend some time with the truck, and I'll ask them a lot of questions. I always ask a lot of questions. And I think that when you bring them on board as a collaborator, that's when you can get stuff done, you know? And I have to say, especially in concerts, you know, I often go to a lot of concerts, and I'm disappointed when I see a very, very dark stage and a very, very bright video screen. And it's like, we have to work together. You know, nobody ever said, I'm going to hear the Rolling Stones tonight. We say, I'm going to see the Rolling Stones. So people have paid a lot of money. They want to see the band. And I feel like, you know, with a little bit of give and take with the video engineer in live concert situations, you can get really great pictures with, you know, a very bright people who's the act that they paid all that money to come to see. So I think that the name of the game is always collaboration. It's always working with other people.
Okay, the next question is asking, do you design custom gobos or always use the stock images?
I only ever do the custom gobos when it's required. I think it's one of the things I'm always, Brad could tell you this, it's one of the things I always jump on the manufacturers about is I say, look, in a moving light, there's certain gobos I know I'm going to need. And I never have ever had the budget. Even on these giant movies, I have never had the budget to replace an entire gobo load. Has never happened. So I need to have, in a moving light, I know I need some kind of a nice leafy breakup. I know I need a general breakup. I know, you know, I want some kind of a grid type feel. So I think that, you know, I push manufacturers all the time. Give me something to work with. If I need a couple of customs, that's fine. But I've never had the budget to be able to do an entire custom load. And I would say that to everybody out there. Go to the manufacturers and tell them what you want. You know, not everything has to be an aerial. There's gobos that could be a great breakup that also look good as an aerial. So I would encourage everybody, you know, pick up the phone. The manufacturers want to hear from you. They want to take your ideas. They want to develop lights that you want to use. And gobos, that's, you know, it's one of the things we look at every single light is, are there some gobos in here that I can use? If I have to replace all the gobos in a light just to be able to use it, chances are pretty good I'm not going to use it.
All right, we have another question. For Rock of Ages, you mentioned some CG lighting for the Dodger Stadium shot. Did you get to advise the CG team, or did they just match your stage lighting?
All of the above. So we had conversations with them, because one of the things, when that particular thing was storyboarded, because they wanted to sort of, their initial plan for that helicopter shot at the end was, we're going to lift off from the stage, we're going to go up above, see the Hollywood sign, and see the Sunset Strip right behind it. Because geographically, that's how it's laid out in LA. But when I met with them, I said, you can't do that. That's never the way it would be. It would never be realistically set up on a field like that. You know, every single stadium, the stage goes in center field. So, you know, I harped on them about that, and they saw the point. You know, and I think we pulled up a picture. I said, look at, you know, Elton John did that famous concert in the 70s in Dodger Stadium, and we pulled that up. And so they adjusted. So that swing around of that helicopter shot, that was not what they planned initially. But I said to them, you can't, this is not believable, it's not realistic. So again, it's always about collaboration and talking to all of the folks that you're going to be working with. I did the same thing when I did the concert sequence in Ghostbusters. the CG people were there who were then putting in the ghosts later on. So all of those people were there, and we had discussions, and I didn't go into it in this case, but that ghost in that movie glows green. So we did things where we used lighting to mimic what was happening with the ghost. So that was all in collaboration with the CG people.
Okay, it looks like that was the last question. Mike, thank you so much for the presentation. This was wonderful information, and thank you, Brad and Heather, for being on board to help to moderate. Mike, his information is up on the screen here. If you have additional questions, I think he'd be open to you reaching out to him on mikematic.com. And if you're interested in attending future sessions of our workshop series, you can find that on pro.harman.com. The whole calendar is listed there. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and we will be sending out the link in several days, as well as posting the videos out on our YouTube channel. So thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.